Hi everyone, welcome back for our third method to make your details and descriptions more interesting. If you have not seen the other videos, that's fine, you can go back and look at them. This is a fine tip on its own. Just getting back to details and descriptions and how you can use those to put those in to keep the story interesting and not boring or slow, etc. So we talked about expanding things, and we talked about using details like to kind of deepen ideas or settings, etc. So this one, so expansion has to do with adding tidbits, adding things to it. Deepening has to do with delving further into the subject. Well, the other thing you can do is you want to create kind of a sense of motion in your descriptions. And motion, I mean, obviously, it's kind of straightforward. It's about putting things in motion, right? So you can do this with settings. So David Farland, an author, he talks about how many writers will kind of describe their setting or something, and it just feels very stagnant. So it might be something like this, right? This is just an example I came up with. A bed had been pushed against the wall. Pillows sat on it. Above it, a shelf had a Michael Jackson nesting doll. But even if the setting itself is not moving, you can use language that suggests some kind of movement, okay? So here's a revamped version. A bed seemed to grow out of a wall, jutting into the room. Pillows curled up and into the comforter, which sprawled off the bed and swept the floor. A Michael Jackson nesting doll hatched open on a shelf. So you can use words like grow, sprawl, swept, and hatch that suggest kind of emotion in the setting, even though the bed, pillow, and doll aren't actually moving. So combine your descriptions with a sense of motion, and it will make them more interesting. In this example, we're putting things in motion in a single scene, like a single moment of description. But you can put places in motion over the course of several scenes. So, like, there's seasons and holidays, so seasons and holidays, they offer, like, a ready-made way to do this. So in the first scene with the park, you describe the park in summer, right? In the next scene, you describe it, what it would be like in the fall or in the winter. So the place has a sense of motion to it as time goes on. It's changing in each scene. J.K. Rowling does this with Ron Weasley's room. So one summer when Harry goes there, he notices there's frog spawn in a tank on the windowsill. Well, a whole year later in the next book, J.K. Rowling mentions that there are frogs in the tank on the windowsill. So just in those two sentences that take place hundreds of pages apart, she's created a sense of motion. She's put motion in her setting, right? The spawn has hatched and grown into frogs. So it's cool that she pays that level of attention to such insignificant details. You can do this with kind of what I called last time the internal part of settings, like your character's personal relationship, history, feelings towards the setting. So you can put how your character views and feels about the place in motion. How they feel about the setting changes, maybe as the scene progresses, or through each scene that the set piece is in, their personal feelings toward it change. So maybe a house up the street that started off scary now feels like a peaceful getaway. And the character's view of that place kind of had emotion, right? It's changing. It's not stagnant. Okay, then we go into characters with how you can put them in motion. Physically and internally. So, obviously, in general, we should be putting our characters in motion through their character arc, right? They should be starting somewhere and ending up somewhere else. Your characters should be changing throughout the story. But this also works in other areas too. You can put the external features of your character in motion. So maybe like a scratch heals up, their hairstyle changes, the way they walk down the hall changes, their build shrinks to something scrawny. So putting the external features in motion can suggest what's happening to them internally. If they become very skinny, it might suggest depression or like a lack of appetite. Characters should be in motion internally, especially with their character arcs, like I talked about. but even in just how they react to what is happening to them throughout the story. Internal motion works even on a micro level too. So when I was doing this post originally, a few weeks ago from doing that, I was rewriting and editing a scene in some of my own work. And on the surface, the scene did exactly what it was supposed to. It furthered the plot, the characters were in character, I described the setting, but it just felt a bit blah to me. Something was off or missing, and as I studied it, I realized that while my viewpoint character was in character, he had no kind of motion. He wasn't really moving all that much between emotions. He wasn't moving between intellectual states. So for a second, I wondered what I should do to fix it. I mean, nothing in that scene spoke directly to his character arc, the main way he's supposed to grow and change in the story. And so I couldn't really force it in there. But then I realized I needed to create a mini arc just for this scene. So I did. I sat down and I brainstormed how I could move his emotional and intellectual state at the beginning of the scene into a different one by the end of the scene. And the way he changed in that short moment had to relate to what was happening in the scene, right? So, and the result, the scene was so much better. It was amazing. So you can create motion in your characters internally, even on a micro level. They can be changing emotionally and intellectually through one scene. Heck, even in a couple of sentences, they can do that. But it becomes more interesting and more complex because it adds motion. My character wasn't internally stagnant in my scene anymore once I did that. His thoughts and feelings had a mini arc. They changed through the scene. Alright, so just kind of a side note, there is this thing in writing called resonance, which isn't talked about very much. You can learn about it in David Farland's book, Drawing on the Power of Resonance in Writing, which I do recommend. And so I'm not going to explain the whole concept of resonance here. It's a big topic. It's another topic. I can't fit it in here. But if you are familiar with the concept of resonance, I wanted to mention that expanding your details, your descriptions, deepening them, and putting items and settings and people in motion can help you keep the internal resonance of your story from feeling stale. Internal resonance is created through repetition in stories, but if we keep repeating the same things, there is a chance it can become stagnant. So you want to use these 3 methods to keep breathing life and power into it. Alright, so in closing, recap. Expanding, deepening, putting things in motions. These are 3 ways you can take your prose to the next level and kick up interest and add complexity, even in the very smallest details of the story. These 3 techniques will help keep your story from feeling stagnant in the broadest sense. The novel as a whole, These 3 techniques will help you keep your story from feeling stagnant in the broadest sense, like the novel as a whole, or in the small sense, like in descriptions of items. And again, remember, these are just guidelines, like pretty much all writing advice and writing rules. How much you want to stick to them and use them is totally up to you and the kind of story you are writing. Anything can be taken to an extreme. And these are just methods to be aware of that you can grab when you need them or to think about as you're brainstorming. Like I said earlier, you can see what else can apply to these 3 things. See if you can expand or put into motion a character's voice. I mean, sure, you could probably do that as long as it doesn't feel random and out of place. If you have any ongoing jokes in your story, you want to see if you can maybe deepen or expand those so you can keep them funny so they don't feel like the same thing over and over again. And that's pretty much it for these details, how to write better details and use description. So, as always, follow and subscribe and do all of those great things. And you can get my latest writing tips at septembercfox.com.